Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. My name is Chad Hill. I lead go-to-market efforts at Trust Your Supplier. I'll get into a little bit more about Trust Your Supplier here in a little bit. Again, appreciate you taking some time to join us, learn a little bit more about what John and I do, where we focus, and how we help prevent fraud. Today, we're going to focus in on where supplier fraud happens, how to spot the areas of risk, and how to detect them early, how companies are using data and real-time data and smarter workflows to protect your payments and your payment environments to help reduce these type of areas. So I'll let my guest introduce himself. John, if you don't mind jumping in here, giving a little bit of background about yourself, and then we'll get into the two companies and our partnership between Trust Your Supplier and LexisNexis.
Great, Chad. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me on your show as such. So my name is John Hutton, as you said. I'm the lead for the payments product portfolio for LexisNexis Risk Solutions. And I have a background leading payments in three global banks, namely Barclays Bank and then Absa Bank across Africa, and then Nationwide Building Society, which is predominantly operating in the UK. So I've got a deep experience in the payment space, working both in the corporate world, banking world, working with suppliers, working with fraud prevention, and all sorts of the tangents that you can go off within that payments life cycle. So great to be here and looking forward to our discussion.
Very good, very good. Well, sticking to the tone of, fraud prevention is really the topic we wanted to get into and really how we address it, where we see the market going. It seems to be picking up a tremendous amount of traction, especially over the last 5 years or so, as we see more AI bots and agents, and their ability to mimic real human activity is becoming extremely impressive, but scary at the same time. And so I'll quickly introduce Trust Your Supplier, our company, where we fit into the market. John, I'll ask you to do the same. But again, the focus of our call today is to how do we as a partnered company approach this type of risk in the market, how we help our customers solve it by putting in not only a technology solution in place, but verifying that, as I mentioned, with some of the data aspects, and verifying real-time information is really key to have a trusted process in place. But real quick, for those of you who are joining and know more about LexisNexis and less about Trust Your Supplier, we've been in the market for a little over 6 years now. We're headquartered out of Raleigh, North Carolina. We are recognized as a small minority and women-owned business. Our DNA really comes out of solving the problem around a truly validated golden record, creating a supplier network that not only marries a seamless process of interaction, communication with your suppliers throughout the onboarding process and the continuous management of those suppliers, but then pulling in how do you manage that supplier from a risk, compliance, and overall transactional perspective, and where do you avoid the common risk from an ESG, human rights, cyber perspective, but narrowing that to an even more specific area of bank fraud and fraud prevention around payment transactions and change requests and those type of things, is where Trust Your Suppliers built a network of suppliers and buyers that come in and transact throughout that process. But we've also pulled in trusted partners like LexisNexis to be able to support that process and validate what our solution is seeing from those suppliers, so the buyers understand that they're working with true, trusted information going forward. There's a couple of areas that Trust Your Supplier really focuses in when I narrow our risk profile away from areas like ESG, human rights, sanctions, financial risk, and other, and take it down to that payment fraud, is we look at the payment account validation, bank account validation, bank ownership validation. There's several levels to when we use terms like validation and verification, and John and I will get into that in a little bit more depth. But what are you looking at when you validate a bank? How are you matching that to the information that you're receiving from the supplier? Once you've created an environment of collection of data and transmitting data back and forth with your suppliers, how are you maintaining that through things like multi-factor authentication? Are you using AI throughout this process to make it more streamlined and efficient throughout your buyers? These are areas where Trust Your Supplier and LexisNexis have created an end-to-end solution to help not only collect and verify, but make that process more seamless, more secure, and more trusted for your buyer teams as you go throughout this. And I'll get into those details a little bit further when we jump into the demo. Okay. There's two different ways that Trust Your Supplier can work with our buyer community in terms of banking fraud. One is really getting into putting up a fraud solution and integrating with LexisNexis in a real-time manner, collecting the bank details on a SaaS type solution directly from the suppliers, validating them on the back end through our partnership with LexisNexis, and then presenting that information in real time once validated to both the buyer and the supplier to be used through transactional purposes. But not every buyer wants to go through that large transformation. A lot of times they just want to validate the information that they currently have on their incumbent suppliers. Trust Your Supplier has a standalone, simplistic file in, file out solution in place where we're happy to take the incumbent data that you have on your suppliers, ingest it into our solution, run that through our validation partners at LexisNexis, and send back a cleansed, normalized file that has a risk review on what is your fraud risk possibility. So there's several different ways that we work with our clients to really come in and help reduce these areas. I'll stop there. And John, I'm hoping we can dive into your expertise, your view a little bit more into why is this happening? Where does it come from? How do I prevent it? Is it from my email? Is it from a website I clicked on? Where is all this type of stuff getting into? And so I'll pass the mic over to you and let you dive a little bit deeper into the fraud and the overall market.
Okay, thank you, Chad. That's really interesting on Trust Your Supplier. I've learned loads there myself, and I can see why you're a market leader. All the areas that you cover there, and they're essential. So a bit about LexisNexis Risk Solutions. Who are we? Well, we're an industry leader. We have multiple solutions for an array of different problems, very prevalent in the modern day. And with our solutions, what we use is the data that we have as a global data provider and a repository of data that's so powerful. We have contributory networks from our customers who, I think one of our platforms, we have a network, Chad, of something like 90 billion different data points that help us with being able to establish behavior on accounts and all those types of things that are necessary when you have that multi-layered fraud prevention approach. Our vision here, as we see on the right-hand side, is to inspire insightful decisions in a world of hidden risks and opportunities. And what we try and do with our customers is we work with them to say, let us help you, let us analyze, let us provide you with the tools and to give you that insight to make sure that you're operating in the safest and most secure way, because we're talking about moving money here predominantly. And money is a very emotive subject, especially when there's bills to pay, especially when there's suppliers to pay. If that doesn't happen correctly, then something downstream is going to have a very negative impact. So it's essential that we have the right processes, tools, and platforms in place. We, in our area within business services, we look at things in three different verticals. We look at payments efficiency. And so just briefly to touch on these different verticals, payments efficiency is very much have you got the right information in your payments to be able to route it? Do you have the right, certainly from a cross-border perspective, are you making sure that that data is correct? Do you have account validation services? And we'll talk a bit about validate and what that means. And then we also do KYC onboarding. So knowing for banks, and certainly in that financial services world, knowing who your customers are, knowing who your banks are to make sure that you're onboarding them in the right way. One of our key focuses is fraud and identity, and we have such a lot of experience within the fraud and identity space. Some of our thought leaders within LexisNexis Risk Solution are absolute superstars in the fraud and identity space, and we help thousands of customers across there, as well as in financial crime compliance as well, with some really powerful tools like threat metrics and Microsoft Continuity, which help both on that behavioral aspect of account monitoring, transaction monitoring, and also customer screening, customer monitoring, and so on. So we have that whole array in that platform that covers everything when it comes to that life cycle of a payment. If you can move to the next slide, please, Shad. Thank you. So as I said, we have this vast data resource. I mean, look at that, 14 petabytes of content. This and our ability to be able to mine that in the right way to help our customers is absolutely essential. And we just make sure that the customers have the right solutions for them. It's not a vanilla one size fits all. We really work with customers in making sure that they have the right solution for them and their business. Next slide, please.
So, John, I mean, I look at that, and this is the world you live in, and I primarily focus supply chain procurement, don't cross over the line into AP, let AP, and once the payment's made, really, happens in other systems, but really the view of before we put them into that process, we're vetting them, we're collecting the bank account, and we're checking that. In my narrow mind, bank fraud is there's the routing number, there's the bank account, and there's the person's name. That's it. Now,
Yeah.
as we look at 14 petabytes, which I'm not sure I comprehend that fully, but what other aspects, especially to procurement and supplier fraud when it's coming through in that channel, what other data elements are super important? And maybe you're going to get into that in some of these other slides, but my simple brain, there's an account number, there's a routing number, there's pretty simple data factors, but there's so much that really goes into
Yeah.
that you guys are looking at.
Yeah, and not all of that data is maybe relevant within the supply chain side of things. If you think about, we support lots of different verticals, so everything from like airlines through to banks, through to global corporates, through to SMEs. We gather data from all of that, all of those different interactions.
Hmm.
One of the key things through our platform's threat metrics, which does that account monitoring type activity. I think there's a contributory network in there, Chad, and that network is designed specifically to say within the LexisNexis Risk Solutions arena, we have this data available, which we then formulate in a particular way that we then help all of our different verticals, help all of our different customers. So they join this network. And that can be everything, for example, yes, to route a payment and correctly, you need to have in the US, for example, the RTN number, the routing transit number. You need to know the name of the person. You need to know the name of the company. You might need to know a couple of different other pieces of data for that payment to go through, but generally it gets as simple as that. Well, that's great, but what about if you knew the date, how the account was behaving? What if you saw different or changes in the way that invoices were coming into you? What about if you saw changes in the way that suppliers were reacting? Or what if the letterhead was different? What if the email address had a slight change in it? What if all these different factors that fraudsters use to try and bypass, right? And you've mentioned a few different things in there, and I think maybe you can just fly through this slide if you want to. But ultimately, what we should say is that in order to prevent that fraud, you need to have that multi-layered approach, which says, okay, we need to know who the payee is up front. We need to know that the bank account is active, that it's valid, that it belongs to the company and to the person who says it belongs to them. But then what about all the stuff that happens on the account to make sure that, for example, when we're working with banks, certainly in a retail banking perspective, let's say for yourself, Chad, you've got your bank sitting behind you and they see some discrepancies going over your account because maybe somebody's come up to you and said, actually, could you put $20,000 into your account, please? And I'll give you 10% of that. And you can take your little cut, and that the washing of that money through your account feels harmless, fully illegal. But the bank is there monitoring the behavior. It's monitoring the deposits, it's monitoring the credits, it's monitoring the behavior. And these sort of changes. That's quite a big example, but there are small changes on account behavior. So, for example, where do you log in from? How many times do you log in during the day? Which device are you logging in from? And all of these different things build a profile around how you operate as an individual and provides the bank and the fraud prevention tools with the data required to be able to say, well, this is how Chad operates normally, and we've seen a change here. Is it something to look into? Is it not? And when we look at, say, for example, with suppliers, is the email address changed?
Mm.
Has the person who usually requests or sends through the invoice, has the name changed? Has the font on the letter or the invoice changed in any way? Is there differences? Even things that you don't see with the human eye, there might be slight shadings in the ink on an invoice or the way something is scanned or something like that that we don't pick up. And you talk about the use of AI. Well, we have, in fact, we've just acquired an organization have some wonderful tools and processes to be able to really look at the difference between deepfakes and all of these things that we can't pick up because that's the way the world's going. And that's why with our solutions, it's that whole end to end of stuff that we don't even think about on a day-to-day basis is the way that the fraudsters are getting through because it's so precise now that you would pick up. And we have one of the teams. We have some fantastic leaders within the fraud space, as I said, and they have this great infographic that says "Spot the deep fake face," right?
Yeah.
And
It's
you know
becoming.
how many people don't get it right, okay? Or
Oh,
spot the deep fake license, the driving license. You can't spot it, right?
oh, every morning there's something I see and I question myself, is that real or am I seeing something in AI that hasn't been caught yet? It's very concerning on where it goes. And when you're looking at things as a lot of our customers and shared customers do from a global perspective,
Mm,
I can understand the US banking system, the European banking system, but what are the regulatory codes for, Colombia versus the Philippines versus the Middle East?
right.
Understanding that level of nuance to be able to prevent fraud and keep compliancy is a level of difficulty and skill that I think is moving beyond just the ability to have a team in the background that runs this once a year. It's something where you've got to fight AI with AI, technology with technology to really keep yourself in position.
For sure. And that fight is getting harder and harder. I
Yeah.
mean, especially as now, and we can maybe flick through some of the slides, but especially as now, if you think in the US alone last year, the growing volume of ACH payments, right? This is a perfect infographic to talk about this, right? So last year, do you know how many ACH payments were processed in the US?
No idea.
Over 32 billion. Okay, 32 billion ACH payments. I think to the tune of something like over $80 trillion worth of payments were made last year. $80 trillion through the ACH scheme. Now, a lot of supplier payments are made through ACH. Um, it comes through different cycles, 2, 3 cycles during the day. Um, it's a reliable payment type. But this account-to-account payment growth, we're seeing this globally as well. In different countries, we're seeing actually regulators encouraging the move from the card rails onto the account-to-account payment rails within different countries. So in the UK, for example, we have what we call faster payments. We've got in Europe with SEPA, the single euro processing area, they're now implementing instant payments. You'll see it in Canada with RTR, the regulation there. It's been around for a while, and Canada's, I was there recently in Toronto talking about this very subject, talking about, preventing authorized push payment scams, APP scams, as they're known within the banking world. Um, because this is a global issue. This is what we're talking about today, Chad, is it's not just for suppliers, it's for Um, everybody has to be really, really educated to a level to be able to identify the tips and the tricks and what do they do? What do fraudsters, well, how are they using it? And there's some really, really sad stories of individuals losing, their life savings because they've been scammed from a romance scam. Somebody, believing that somebody is who they say they are, and actually they're not. And when we put it in the context of with your customers and through Trust Your Suppliers, I mean, look at some of these numbers here. The explosion in the use of synthetic identities up 50 odd percent. How do we know a person is who they say they are? you know, and that's getting more and more difficult. And then we look at the real-time payments, digital payments volume. We're seeing 200 and odd percent growth in the account-to-account payments. Well, what does that mean? It means as payments are getting, changes. We've seen it in the US with, for example, behavioral changes with Lyft or Uber. We're seeing um, drivers being paid the next morning almost immediately. So that's why we're seeing this level of growth. And with that comes an increase in fraud. So how
Yeah.
how do how do we prevent that increase of fraud? And one of those main things is making sure that we can validate who the account belongs to. We can make sure that we know that we're sending the money to Chad Hill and you are actually Chad Hill.
Yeah. It surprises me. I've been in procurement now for probably 17 years or so. How many Fortune 500 global 2000 companies that I talk to on a regular basis that may have something in place that's supposed to be used, but globally, regionally is not being adhered to. And so the collection for validation is usually, well, can you send me a copy of your voided check or a bank statement with a letterhead on it? And
Yeah.
that the extent that we're going through. And to your point, that romanticizing of I have a relationship with a trusted person may be true, but presents so much opportunity for fraud in all kinds of different areas beyond banking, that put your company at risk, put your payments at risk. And that's where we aren't solving this end to end. What our approach, at least from Trust Your Supplier and how we work with LexisNexis, and I can kind of use this to transition a little bit into the demo, is we want to set that process of collecting data into a standardized, organized methodology that is backed by a secure technology solution. So one of the reasons Trust Your Supplier has chose blockchain as one of our key technology solutions on the back end. It is immutable. It is auditable in real time on the ledger perspective, but it keeps our information very disparate in how it's managed between not only the buyer and the supplier, but the supplier and their multiple buyer customers that they work with to be able to send this information out to. So what I've pulled up on the screen, John, and we'll kind of walk through this, and please jump in on certain areas where you really see it. But if I was a buyer and I'm going in to invite a new supplier, or I've already invited a supplier that I'm doing business with, that supplier would receive a email request to create a username and password within Trust Your Supplier and go through our onboarding process. Now, the onboarding process varies in complexity of what we're signed up to do with our end buying customer, whether it's a full onboarding solution collection of firmographic and other questionnaire information, getting acceptance of code of conducts type of information, reviewing them from a full risk due diligence from financial risk, human rights, child labor, other sanctions and watch list details, ESG and sustainability risk, as well as any banking type risk that would come through on the fraud, as well as part of this onboarding process. For most of our customers at this time of data collection, it's a golden opportunity to collect the bank information and start to standardize that relationship through a securitized channel. So our solution offers two-factor authentication, all those details of blockchain security that I've gone through, but it allows from a supplier, once you've logged in and once you've created your profile, who's your company, what are your tax IDs, confirming your DMB, movies type information so we can really get an understanding of your profile. Then we're getting your bank account details. This goes well beyond just email and the avoided check so I can run some checks on the back end. Once we go through the process of collection, and I'll hit update to give you a visual of what's collected in here. Oh, and of course, we time out right when I click the right screen here. Let me pull this back up, and I'll jump over here to my bank account details. I'll go to update. With this in here, John, a lot of those details that you were talking about we went through in the opening, what is validated and what is the verification at what level? There's several levels to this. I can validate that a bank exists. Yes, there is a Bank of Vietnam, and yes, it's in this town under this structure. Yes, I can validate there's a bank account under this routing number of this account number. But does all that tie together from the information that you're receiving from the supplier to what's sitting with the bank account and what LexisNexis will be able to validate? Or, John, to use one of your better words in the opening, will there be discrepancies in between that information that need to have AI automatically highlight because those simple things can be missed? Like the account holder name, if it's in Vietnamese and I'm in the US or another country, I may not be familiar. So I may not understand that the characters are reversed, fat fingered, or whatnot.
Yeah.
That's where we provide an environment to collect this detail. We can still collect any account evidence, whether it's the bank account deposit slip, bank statement, receive that file, house that file. But once we've collected all these details and we've hit update or submit, on the back end, trust your suppliers transmitting that collected information to LexisNexis for verification of all of those details that I just went through.
Yeah. And what you've shown there, I mean, how powerful is that, right?
Right.
I mean, having that system in place to be able to say there's no way that an individual working within an accounts payable department in a corporate, somewhere in the country would be able to do that level of validation and the speed and the way and the efficiency and the way that you've just done it just now. Okay.
Right.
So we need these tools. Absolutely, we need these tools. There is an added layer here when we're talking about account validation, and it's in the US there isn't quite the regulation for it yet, but certainly with one of our new products that's coming live this year is not just the account validation, but the payee validation as well. So, for example, we already have payee validation services. You've shown the Bank of Vietnam there, which is really interesting. And I didn't set you up with this, Chad, but we have a big payee validation service across Southeast Asia, for example, where you can, in conjunction with, is this an active account? Is it within the Bank in Vietnam? Is it, etc., all the things that you just described? But what about, are we making sure that the payee, the name, and the account match?
Right.
Right. So it's a different view here. So you're saying, well, this is what's the name on the account? Well, you've got it,
So
Tom Cruise.
name on the account, then the account branch, the
So that's
account,
the bank branch, bank contact name, Tom Cruise.
and the full contact holder of who to
Yeah.
contact if there's an issue with this bank account. Yeah, a collection
Well,
of all these details and having them cross-referenced for validity is extremely important in
see, I
different
would I,
global
I would
levels.
immediately have a call out come off the back of this because I would say, well, Tom Cruise in your account receivables, right? Scroll down,
You know,
right? Bank contact name. Tell me the difference between what's in the bank contact name and then the name up above.
right.
Do you
Yep.
see it?
Yep. So we've actually run this scenario. If I go to the demo environment, there's actually a notification of these type of changes. So
Right.
getting to, yes, the supplier, we're providing the ability, hopefully in an easy, seamless UI UX. We just
Yeah.
need your data. Give us your data. Now on the back end, allow us to validate, normalize, cross-reference, find the discrepancies.
Yeah.
then the actions made on those, if I can hit cancel, let's just get out of this, is now how does that get presented to the buyer on the buyer side? If I
Sure.
log into this, since I got timed out, on the buyer side, you have full notifications. You're receiving email notifications from the tool anytime your supplier has been fully validated and
Mm.
onboarding has gone through successful, validation has failed, or we're running a revalidation, or the supplier has proactively submitted in a change request. So one of the biggest areas we see fraud prevention is I need to make a change to my bank account.
Yeah.
Well, we're now saying don't submit a form. Don't contact your category manager. Log into your Trust Your Supplier, go through the two-factor authentication, submit your change, which is going to go through a revalidation with LexisNexis.
Yeah.
Once that's done, we'll make the payment to the appropriate changed account. Until then, we won't make it through any side channels because that opens us up for fraud. This sets that standard process. When you're coming into your notifications, anything from a mismatch perspective, if I go into category, I look for any of my notifications related to banking. This
Yeah.
is where I can see as we went through in that demo environment, I linked this account, then I went through and it failed because I was making changes on the back end. The failed came because there was a discrepancy between the naming conventions and the supplier details that were submitted.
Yeah. And that, I mean, if you imagine working in a department that's processing payments, all day, every day, back in the day when that would be done manually, how powerful this is and how it really, really limits the risk because you're processing payments through the platform. You've had to log in, you've done the MFA, you've ensured that they have the right credentials and all that kind of stuff so that the person's there. Now, being able to send the payment to the right place, you still need to have the right data, right? So you need to have make sure that's the right routing information, make sure it's the right Swift BIC, you've got it down there, your Swift codes, it's in the right currency, your bank keys, and
Yep.
all of that. And I think through the platform, because we provide all of that data in the background to be able to pre-populate all of those payments, it takes away the guessing. It takes away actually having to look back in the day when we had the paper forms of Banker's Almanac, which is where an awful lot of this information resides. And Banker's Almanac was the sort of the handbook, if you will, of how banks and other organizations they would reference that to be able to get the right routing information. Now it's all within the system, and it's amazing to see that this is now done at a click of a button. It fills out that information correctly. You've done the onboarding. You've got the right account information. You've got everything you need in there. That data is so powerful. The platform together with it is it's almost certainly fraudsters can't break into that, right?
Yeah.
Fraudsters
Uh,
can't get in there.
and then applying even further automation from here is if this is a supplier where the validation fails through a change, can this put a stop payment on my P2P and AP solutions downstream? So
Yeah.
we connect via APIs directly into their core ERP or AP systems to be able to keep the banking account details up to date, but also this validation success status can drive to what is this profile status. So as you can see, you can put a supplier on hold within the Trust Your Supplier system. If one of those actions are their bank account failed or something on that side, put the supplier, we have not collected bank details, we can transact in those. So right now I've jumped over and I'm looking at this supplier's profile. This is where I can view all those details, any information that was submitted. I can see the details in the solution. I can see any updated bank statements, voided checks, whatever is collected through the process is all collected here. But if I go to my action center, as I mentioned, you're proactively receiving all these notifications, but we're orchestrating it to the right user. So it's not always the supplier who need or the category manager who needs to review the bank change. It could be the AP manager. So you
Mm.
see this role assigned. That's where we run a lot of intelligence in the orchestration of who should be receiving what type of risk indicator. Is it more of a cyber risk because there's something happening with the email structure, so it should go to your cyber team? Or is it a financial risk because there's something happening with the bank account? And then because we are built on blockchain, everything from a historical perspective is immutable, visible on the ledger in real time. So anything from when did they publish, they updated their bank account on April 10th, what was that, who submitted, when are those details? All of that information is continuously tracked, again, really driving towards putting a full fraud prevention
Yeah.
solution in place.
And that can't be changed, can it?
No.
No, exactly. So you've got that full auditable trail of every transaction, which is again so powerful.
Yep. So I can see here my notification of once the supplier was put into the approval request came because it failed on some bank details. The
Yeah,
city and the country were not matching what was received against what the bank had and what LexisNexis was reporting back. Once this was taken through, then it was put through in that validated state. So there's all kinds of automation that we can get into. I think, one of the biggest learnings I hope people take away from this call is it's marrying the data collection process, the validation process, and most importantly, that human interaction with the data. How are we looking at it and how are we managing that risk before we're transmitting any financial payments out the door? Because that's where the real pain comes from, is when you've been hit with that type of financial risk. It definitely gets your CFO's attention very quickly.
it does. And I suppose two things just to add on that. Firstly, is there an override in there? Can people bypass it on an individual basis to be able to say, actually, you know what, Chad, I don't really believe what LexisNexis is saying here. I just want to make sure I get the money to this account.
They can approve
Yeah,
with conditions, say
absolutely.
there is a mitigation plan or we are rectifying the situation on the bank account, but we're going to go ahead and approve it because we've been using this supplier for 15 years. We
Exactly.
know there's a change that happens once every 2 years. We're in that cycle. Go ahead and approve it, make the payment. We'll collect the details on the back end. Absolutely.
And having that flexibility is important because, again, sometimes writing transit numbers or Swift BICs and so on, um, they do change. And with the data that we provide in the background, that gets updated on a very, very regular frequency. So it's not very often that that happens, but still from a user experience perspective, it's important to be able to have that level of override. Um, and the other thing as well is that, when you gave that demo, I mean, it just shows the use of a system is a protection in itself. Rather than having somebody go into the company bank account, set up a new payee, and then put in the details and having to look them up and get the company addresses and all of the things that are required to do that, to send that payment. You do all of that, you're exposing yourself to a huge amount of risk.
Yep.
And that's why these kind of ERP systems and other systems are really, really powerful in being able to have everything in one place, validate everything you need to, and hopefully have a relatively risk-free environment.
Absolutely. And, I think between our two companies, we've done a great job of really integrating that flow to make it very, very seamless and a very powerful process. Almost goes unnoticed with most of our buyer community of the fact that we do have a validated address, year of incorporation, the contact details, the email structure, the website structure, married with all the bank account information that we receives, allows Trust Your Supplier and LexisNexis to really give assurance that all of this is connected. There's not disparities. If there's disparities, they've been notified, announced, and corrected on, or action available. Once you go into the Trust Your Supplier solution, we've uploaded your incumbent suppliers, set the process for onboarding new suppliers. Adding bank account validation through LexisNexis is really as simple as adding a new app on your iPhone. If you want to go download the latest new game from the App Store, you would go in there and just download it. Similar process here. I went from our App Store, I went to the LexisNexis app. You would be able to go in, If you've signed up to LexisNexis on the back end directly or through Trust Your Supplier, we would enter your access keys in the API details, which would allow us then to start to run this configuration. But it also gives the users the ability to define a lot of things of who am I running bank account validation on? Can I run that by segmentation? What type of details drive approval, and where can there be automation on the back end? And if the banking information failed, can the solution automatically send out things like anti-bribery and corruption questionnaires? The answers to all of that is yes. We've built all of that in the back end between our app and integration between LexisNexis and us. Please, if you're watching this and you've made it to the end of this call and you really geek out on banking validation, John and I do as well, reach out. We'd love to find time to go through a customized demo for you, show you a little bit more of the capabilities behind our solution. But John, I appreciate the chat with you. I enjoyed the topic. Scares me as always of all the different channels that these hackers and nefarious people are really trying to put out there. But I think we've got good solutions and good partners in place to address it.
Thank you, Chad. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today, and I'm glad that we can continue with our partnership and that it's making the difference that you need with your customers. And we look forward to continuing to work with you.